Hi, my name's Eric Kislick, and I recently wrote a book that became a bestseller on Amazon. It's ranked number 1 and number 2 for new chess bestsellers. And I wanted to talk about what I learned, and I think I have a lot of pieces of advice that you probably won't see anywhere else. I'll start things off with some general advice. This is just called How to Become a Better Writer, and these are mainly lessons I learned from writing the book. And before we start, I'll just go over some general pieces of advice that I think you'll see in a lot of different sources on becoming a better writer, becoming a more creative writer or persuasive writer, generally on nonfiction, but actually this ties into fiction as well. Okay, so as for general pieces of writing advice, the first point is familiarity. Know your audience. You don't want to talk about something very obscure that very few people will relate to unless that's a very, very specific audience. Point number 2, you really want to evoke curiosity with your first sentence if it's an article or blog post. If it's a book, which is what I'm talking about here, generally the introduction has to evoke some curiosity. A lot of people are just going to read the introduction. If it's not interesting enough, then a lot of them won't read further. And I've read some introductions which were 1 page long and they just didn't provoke that much curiosity. And I was really wondering, well, what's in the book? What am I going to see? And if I didn't find out, I didn't stick around to see what was there. The third point is pace and lead the reader. So what that means is that you want to get kind of into the mindset of your reader and you sort of want to aim them where they want to go. It's a little bit of an abstract concept, but it's important to get into the mindset of the reader. The fourth point is to write in direct sentences. If you write in very indirect sentences, some of them may be very hard to understand, or they may simply take your brain longer to process what's being written because what's said is so indirect. It might not seem like what you're saying matters very much based on how you word it, but it actually does. So if you can be as direct as possible, that'll make it as easy as possible for the reader. The fifth point is try to take out jargon, cliches, and adverbs that don't change the overall meaning of what you were writing. Essentially, as you're kind of sweeping through what you've written, if you've added in a couple cliches or some adverbs that are a little bit excessive, they don't actually change much. The main point is that when the reader basically reflects back on what they read, they're probably not going to remember those specific adverbs you used. So it's just a little bit extra, but if the jargon you use may chase away some potential readers, then you're just costing yourself readers with that. So be careful with those. Point number 6, also a very difficult one. It's about brevity. Brevity is equated with intelligence. We all process it that way, even if we don't like it. A point that can be made very, very simply, first of all, is we're more likely to remember it. Second of all, it'll stick with us better. But overall, we have more respect for the author. We think, wow, that's very impressive that they were able to pack that much meaning into so few words. The 7th point is reach the biggest audience possible with simple language whenever possible. So a lot of people may feel the need to kind of flex your vocabulary a bit, but unless it's a very specific type of audience that really is looking for that, I would avoid that as much as possible. I just tried to reach the broadest possible audience, and I think it was a good approach. Remove ugly sounding sentences and ugly words. So good examples of ugly words would be pulchritude, moist, and phlegm. Words like that you're going to want to avoid. Sentences that seem very cumbersome or clumsy or even hard to mentally keep track of. Let's say if you introduce 5 or 6 new ideas in one sentence, the reader may simply become confused. So be very careful with that, especially if it sounds awkward. So consider associations. So basically you're trying to link the reader to something so that they can, first of all, visualize what's going on, but also feel connected to what they're reading. The next point is visual language, and relatable anecdotes and analogies are very useful. So for example, especially someone writing fiction, you want them to visualize what's going on. So that's clearly a very important point. And the last point is to end clever or provocative. You would like people to go away thinking. You want to write something that's thought provoking. And but in either case, you would love for the ending to be very, very strong. You want to have a very strong opener and a very strong closer. So the last 2 pages or so, you would like there to be at least 2 or 3 very strong paragraphs. So on to my individual pieces of advice that I think are new. The first point is when you're thinking about a book title, you do want to aim for your own angle. And you might be wondering, well, you wrote a book called Applying Logic in Chess. Sounds like a little bit of I don't know, is that your own angle on it? Well, I had a lot of different angles I could come at it from, and I essentially thought, well, there's so many cliche things you could say, like improve now or guaranteed results in X amount of time, but most of that is not only false advertising, it's not that specific. So essentially what my idea is that if you try to be as logical as possible about every single element of something, that you just have the best possible approach. And I think I actually did take kind of my own angle, even though it might not seem like I chose the best words, but it's very difficult in just 4 words to express a lot of meaning like that, especially on something so complicated. But if you have your own specific bent or angle, it can be very valuable. So of course, with brainstorming the book, you're going to want to start with a number of options. And I think the best way to actually A/B test is I don't recommend that you post online randomly, or you make, for example, a Facebook post or any type of vague post. I don't think it's that valuable. I think that the best way to get specific advice is just to basically make a list of possible titles and ask specific people. And so the ones that really grab people's attention, those are the ones that people are going to tell you, oh, this one's my favorite. So you can easily get feedback from 15 or 20 people in a day, and you'll go, okay, these are the ones that were most popular. And if there's a title you really like, but nobody, let's say you ask 25 or 30 people and nobody else likes it, you may want to reconsider it. So that's just a simple way to get good feedback already on your book title. Next point was something I had no idea about when I wrote my book, about a book deal. And basically, a lot of the time, if you get a book deal, you might be thinking, oh, well, I want to go straight ahead. I want to finish as quickly as possible. And you don't really realistically anticipate the setbacks, but you do have to sort of count on, there can be unexpected things in your life. You never know. You might be moving. You might have a sickness or an injury. Even just getting a few colds can set you back a month or 2. So definitely just give yourself time. And I think 16 to 18 months is a reasonable amount of time. And because we have to be careful. Just because if you make a 12-month book deal and it flies right by you, then your publisher will be naturally quite angry. So just try to manage your time as ideally as possible and be realistic about it. So the next point is chapter lengths. This is another thing that I think a lot of people don't think about, especially in writing their first book. You want to make the chapter lengths realistic, and you also want to make sure your first and second chapter are not too long, as they may cause readers to simply stop reading. If you're I've come across books where the first chapter is 55, 60, 65 pages, you already want to stop. So I think that you're gonna want to limit it to, it can still be 15 pages, maybe 20 pages, but you're definitely going to want to limit it. Just imagine, again, the whole point is put yourself into the position of the reader. You're going to want to limit it so that you also give them that good, satisfying feeling of finishing a chapter. So I recommend that you split up longer chapters into shorter ones. For example, if you have a 40-page chapter and not all of the ideas are directly connected, you're probably going to want to split that up. Let's say you have 3 different ideas in a chapter. You might want to split that up into 3 chapters because people will like the feeling of completion. And for example, let's say someone's reading a book at night before they go to bed. They finish the chapter, they finish 10 pages, they go to bed, and they can make it a goal of finishing the next chapter the next day. So chapter lengths are very important. That's something a lot of people just simply would not think about. The next point is organizing your chapters. So you're going to want to put the most engaging and interesting material first. I did mention that you're going to want to finish the book very, very strong, but in terms of organizing your chapters, you're going to want not only engaging and interesting material first, but you're going to want to allow yourself to build on the previous material, characters and storylines, and have a natural build-up. So number 5 is having a clear perspective. I think this is very important, and another thing that we would just normally skip over. Normally, it just wouldn't be something that we would focus on that much. So my advice here is to write out your main points for each chapter to make sure that they're properly focused on. I think a lot of what happens for many writers is that they simply lose the thread. They lose the focus, and suddenly you may have a chapter that started off for the first 2 pages or so very strong, and then the next 6 pages or so just kind of go off on a tangent that loses the power that was built up from the first 2 pages. It's easy to write about something that specifically interests you as the author, but if it loses the focus, then the experience for the reader will be worse. So remember, the book's for the reader and the main points must be focused that way. I think that's something that even some very, very good authors miss out on. They sometimes just might go on and on about a certain topic and miss the fact that you need to really focus on what you want the reader to pay attention to. So point number 6 is making notes for the book. This is very important because a lot of the ideas that we come up with for the book are not going to just suddenly pop into our heads while we have Microsoft Word open while we're writing the book. So I recommend writing down notes anytime you have an idea for the book. Don't count on yourself to remember it later, especially if it's important. Do not be lazy with this. A lot of people will go, okay, I might remember it later, and certainly I think we've probably all been guilty of that. But if you're aware of that, then you'll go, okay, I really need to write this down. And I do think a very important point to make is that digital notes are not as good as notes on an old-fashioned pen and paper. And I'll get into that in a little bit more detail. So writing in a notebook gives you space and visibility. And what I mean by that is, let's say you have 15 pages of notes. You can easily flip through it. You can see it all right in front of your face. It's all very clear and laid out in a very simple and straightforward manner. And it makes it easier to look at your computer screen and your notes at the same time when you're doing that. I think a big problem for a lot of people, I've known a lot of people who made digital notes. I'm certainly not trying to discourage anybody from not using digital notes in their daily life, but at least in terms of writing a book when you want to be really, really organized, the problem is, let's say you have 25, 30 pages of notes. It can be very difficult to, skip through it. Let's say you need to go to the 20th page or so. It's very easy if you have a notebook to just simply have that page open right in front of you and leave it there. Whereas, let's say you're on your computer, are you going to leave it open at the 20th page of notes, or your 20th document? It's much, much more cumbersome if it's a digital note that way. So I said, if you have 15 or 20 pages of notes on a computer, it'll be easy to become overwhelmed by them, or simply not open them again, or even simply lose them. It's very easy to, let's say you save a file in a certain folder and you simply forget about the folder, or you forget to open it. So it's nice that if you have a notebook, it's right in front of you. It's all right in the place where you know it's going to be. So anyway, I think that's a very important point. This is something I also had not really thought about very seriously. I only really started taking very serious notes for the book about a few months before I finished, but I wish I had started this out strong. So the next point is do not hesitate. I know this sounds very obvious, but we should really reinforce this point. So let's say you have some completed material for the book and you know exactly where it goes. Again, it's very natural to say, well, I can put that in anytime I want. But the problem is that if you do that more than once, suddenly things will add up, and it may turn out that you might have 15 different things to add. That may end up taking you a couple hours. So you might be wasting hours just by hesitating. So I personally ended up wasting 20 man-hours to complete my book because I put in everything at the last minute, certain things that could have been put in right away. And when I finished a certain section, so if you're close to completing a chapter, put in that last little burst of energy to complete it at that moment or later that day. You have it on your mind, you have all your ideas kind of bubbling in your head. It's really the exact right moment to finish it. So if you put it off, it's going to be difficult to recall the train of thought you had when you were concentrating on it, and you'll waste a lot of time looking for those loose ends to fill in. And we unfortunately, one piece of advice that I'm not giving here is we unfortunately cannot count on being able to work on the book hours per day every day. I know that it's a very easy piece of advice to give, just write 2 hours a day. But that's, we have very busy lives. It's very difficult to exactly plan on when you'll have the time to do it. So I personally chose to focus most of my writing time in the mornings. But the main thing is that because we don't know when necessarily we'll have time to write, we need to make sure that we're not hesitating. So the next point is peer review. This is another very important thing that I think a lot of people totally skip over and don't really think about. So most of us have contact with a lot of people who can help us out with the book or give us feedback, give us ideas, give us ways of just kind of looking at things from a new perspective. And the main thing you don't want to do is do not send people your entire book to edit at once. People have sent me, I've had so many people send me things that were 15, 25, 30 pages, and I have lots of work to do, and suddenly someone says, oh yeah, can you read these 30 pages for me? And the answer is no. So, and that's realistic. So do not send people your entire book to edit at once, or even long, full chapters. It's simply going to overwhelm the vast majority of people so that they won't even start it. So what I recommend doing is rank your most important points or parts of your book that you want to get read, so just to make sure that you get feedback on it. And when they're prioritized, it's much easier to kind of look at it and go, okay, this is what I want feedback on immediately, and this is the order that I want it in. And so I would focus on sending people 1 page at a time or less. You may even just want to send people a specific paragraph and say, hey, what do you think about this? And even just in a short email or even on a social media message, it's not a big deal to read a simple paragraph. So you may even want to rank your most important paragraphs. And if you send those around, you can get instant feedback. Doesn't take people much time, so I think that's a very good piece of advice. And when I'm sending people things, I like to send it as a nice and neat small PDF. Make it easy and digestible, non-intimidating. It makes people want to read it, be fascinated. And you can even create a schedule to send sections of the book to different people. So you can say, okay, well, I want this person to read this on Monday, then maybe on Wednesday I'll go over the second most important point, then on Friday. And what this also does is it also helps you complete sections of the book at that moment. Number 9 is editing your book. So the edits for your book will likely fall in 3 camps. There are quick fixes, which you can fix instantly. There's research you need to do for the book, especially specifically if it's a nonfiction. And there's organizational and deep content related issues. So this is generally the type of stuff that you'll get back from an editor. So my advice is solve the quickest issues first. I know it may sound really, really obvious, but here's the thing. So you may get, let's say an editor sends you something back. You have 50 things in front of you. You might look at it and initially feel overwhelmed. That's actually how I felt. But what you need to do is you need to go, okay, these are the quick fixes and I can fix these right away. So let's say you have 50 things. you might be able to write down 10 quick fixes and just instantly go and fix them. So they're light, they're easy, they're painless, and they'll also make you feel motivated and give you momentum to complete the rest. You're essentially just ticking things off the list. So you're just checking things off and getting more and more work done. And if you need to consult other people, don't put that off because you don't know how long it's going to take them to reply. So if you have to consult somebody else, just ask them right away. And if you need to do research, get started on that research right away. Fixing the wording, for example, if you have some very complicated sections of the book, that can be done last. And I recommend using a notebook to write down all the edits that need to be made. The most difficult ones can be done last. And it can help, of course, to use two computers. So, as for the finishing touches, to get a last look at your work, read the book backwards to get a sense of the way everything builds up. I actually quite enjoy that. I think it's very interesting when you look at your material and you look at it from back to front. You go, okay, well, I can see how it builds up in sort of a different order. So it gives you a very good perspective on the flow of the book and if the earlier material builds up to the latter. And this perspective tends to be overlooked. Yet you may notice that some content looks very weak this way or that it does not flow naturally. This is because when you look at things backwards, the entire emphasis is on whether everything fits together and makes sense. So basically, when you're looking at things from back to front, you're probably not going to be focusing as much on grammar or even wording. You're mostly going to be focusing on, well, does the content actually make sense from this perspective in this order? And I think this also allows you to see and judge, am I finishing things off strong? Because if you're not, then you may want to change that, and you may want to make sure that you're finishing things off with a lot of momentum and power. So my closing advice is just about general writing. Brainstorm topics as much as you can to get the broadest range of possible ideas to choose from. A very important point is to organize your ideas and your work as carefully as you can. That may mean simply creating a folder on your computer and just calling it writing, and then creating subfolders, very specifically laying out, for example, if you're writing a book or if you're writing an article, you want to be very, very specific with how you lay out all of your work and all of your ideas. So personally, every morning I write in a notebook for 1 hour with no distractions. This makes your thinking extremely clear on everything you want to write about. I keep one notebook for my general thoughts and general ideas, and another for just more specific writing, for example, writing out a full chapter. So one will just be about some very general ideas, maybe just some list of possible chapters, list of possible ideas to talk about, while the other one, I might actually write out a full chapter, or I'll write as much as I can. And that will basically serve as something which will be a basis to write a full chapter on in Word. And when looking through your own writing on your general thoughts, it always spurs new thoughts in the moment. If you go through your general thoughts each morning, it will definitely deepen your thinking. This is important for learning in general. It's also important for just having cognitive quiet, becoming very clear about what you think about all of your own ideas, and it helps a lot with not only learning, but also deepening your own thoughts on whatever you've written. So even if you're writing fiction, this process is likely to lead to deeper plot and character development, and overall will lead to a more interesting read. So I hope that these ideas have been useful, and hopefully some of them you haven't seen before. Thanks, and consider subscribing.